two parts of their Hebrew Bible. So he's basically looking at the Old Testament and saying, look, Jesus fulfilled these. He's not trying to say, oh, it's the New Testament. Old Testament doesn't apply anymore. He is using the law of Moses and the prophets to persuade them. There's a lot of people that say, we just go by the New Testament. And this is my main reason for why the Old Testament is still important for Christians today. Hey everyone, this is Noah Randolph. Welcome back to another episode of Bible Classroom. In this session, I finish up the book of Acts with this three-part series. We're walking through Acts chapter 28 in this series. In this first episode, I focus a lot just on the beginnings of the chapter. I spend a lot of time actually with maps showing Paul's journey on the ship that he was going on and how they got blown off course. So if you're listening to this on podcast, just recognize that there are several visual aids that you won't be seeing, but they are available on our YouTube channel. That same episode will be put up on YouTube, so if you want to see that, feel free to go check it out at our YouTube channel. If that's not your interest and you're okay not knowing really where the map locations and everything are, feel free to just listen as usual. Yeah, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so I'm going to really try hard not to mess with this mic, but we'll see how it goes. So a little bit of summarization for those that have not been here for everything. We've been kind of going through the book of Acts, really picking some of the highlights. So we haven't been doing every chapter. In particular, we've gone through 8 weeks of this now, which has been crazy to do 8 weeks in this one book. And we are at the last chapter in the book of Acts. Last week, Ashley talked about Paul and sort of his last trip before he gets anchored in the city of Rome. And that's what we're going to be talking about mostly today, is what he does once he gets to Rome and the reception that he gets in Rome. This is where Luke chooses to end this entire story, really. And for some people, this is actually kind of a cliffhanger, how he ends it. We'll talk about that a little bit, of just how I don't actually think it's a cliffhanger at all. And he's intentionally ending this the way he's ending it. We'll talk a little bit about the implications of how he ends it. The main thing we'll be focused on is one of the themes that we talked way back in the beginning in the book of Acts is Luke is really trying to push on the Gentile and Jew issues that are happening in early Christianity. I talked about how Christianity started out completely Jewish, right? This was the way that it began, with just Jews. And about halfway through the book, we have the story of Cornelius, which Nick taught on, that opens up Christianity now to literally the rest of the world. And ever since then, Luke has been playing with this tension that whenever Paul does missionary work in other countries, he is having a lot of success with the Gentile people in these cities and these towns, but he's meeting a lot of Jewish resistance. And this is really important, not just because it's a story, but also because there are a lot of prophecies in the Old Testament that are prophesying that Israel, specifically the nation of Israel, is the key to the whole restoration of the world. There are, actually in the Boring Bible podcast that Ashley and I do, we've gone through a lot of different prophecies in Isaiah that are specifically focused on Israel being a light to the rest of the world. And so Luke is kind of playing with this question of what is happening with the Jewish people in all of these stories, and what's going to come about from all of this, not obstinance. I guess obstinance is a good word, but obstruction that they, the stubbornness, that's the best word, the stubbornness that they are holding on to instead of accepting that Jesus is their Messiah. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to read the story. It's pretty short. We're going to read kind of the ending section. Ashley actually covered all the way to a bit of, let's see here. Yeah, she covered all the way to verse 9. So we're going to pick up in verse 11 of chapter 28. And then I'll walk through that chapter. We'll kind of do what I did last time going through this, which is I'll kind of like stop at specific verses and talk about verses a little bit as we walk through that. And then I'll have some final thoughts after we finish up. So you guys ready? Yep. All right. All right. So after 3 months, this is chapter 28 of Acts, verse 11. After 3 months, we put out to sea in a ship that had wintered in the island. It was an Alexandrian ship with the figurehead of the twin gods, Castor and Pollux. All right. So let's start there. So the reason for the 3 months wait, why they were in Malta for 3 months is, Ashley talked about last time, they got blown off course by a windstorm that caused them basically to be shipwrecked on the island of Malta. And we can look at a little photo here of exactly how that happened. I'll make this a little bigger. Sorry, the resolution on this isn't great, but hopefully you can still see. This is actually the entire journey that the ship went on. So they started out in Jerusalem here, and they made their way up to Sidon, all the way down to Myra here. All of this was covered not by Ashley. Ashley started right here, and they got blown off course basically down this way. But yeah, they started their journey in Jerusalem and got all the way here. You can tell too by the way that they've crafted this route that they always wanted to keep within distance of land, which I find very interesting, probably because of the fact that it was so near winter, and they didn't want something to happen that ended up happening, where they get blown into literally the middle of the ocean over here. So by the time they get to Crete, Paul advises the ship, hey, let's stay here through winter, don't go on. But instead they're like, no, we're going to try and make it all the way through. And as a result, northeastern wind comes down and basically comes this direction and blows them away from Crete and into this chaos where eventually they end up shipwrecking on Malta. So you can really see just from here just how terrible that was. Like, that would have been the most terrifying thing in the world. You literally don't see land anymore, and you're just like in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea getting lost. So they end up at Malta. Ashley covered what happens on Malta. And then from Malta, they have to stay here for 3 months, basically, while all of the winds subside. In the winter season, the winds were the worst. So they wait 3 months. And then actually a ship that has been ported there for all of that time as well, an Alexandrian ship, they then get on board and then make their way upward. Cool thing about just this is kind of miraculous in some shapes. It's not like full on like hardcore miracle, but I will show you at least the trade routes of the time period that this is in. And you can see here, number 2, this is Alexandria. So Alexandria is right here. You can see all the trade routes that Alexandria would have made for a ship that way. So they would have gone up here, kind of like Paul's journey through here. Malta, by the way, is right here. So very rarely does a Alexandrian ship end up here. You can see a trade route goes from this part all the way down. I think that's Sicily, goes all the way down to here. But very rarely does an Alexandrian ship end up here in Malta. About the only case that you could argue is a trade route might have gone, this ship might have gone down following this kind of line and then eventually stopped in the Gulf of Sirte and then made its way up to Malta. That's probably, I'm going to guess that's probably how this ship ended up near Malta. Regardless, it was kind of a miracle that this ship was there. So it's kind of cool to point that out just from the trade route perspective to get an idea of what's going on. And Luke makes a point, which I find very fascinating, to say that the ship had the figurehead of the twin gods Castor and Pollux. I don't think Luke is like advocating that these gods existed, but I do think it's funny because these twin gods are the Gemini twins, though if you've ever looked up into the stars and seen someone mention the twins, that's these two gods here. And they were known for the gods of good seafaring and good good ship voyages or whatever. So it's kind of funny just to realize that Luke's kind of throwing this in as, by the way, like, hey, they did have a figurehead of like the gods that are good at doing ships. So I just thought that was funny that he kind of decided to put that little detail in for all of us to kind of realize that. I think what he's saying here is that the twin gods are subservient to Paul, basically, and that like Paul had prophesied that they would all be okay. And so it's the outworkings of this in Gentile language, I guess I would say. He's using kind of the philosophy and their language to communicate that they're going to be safe and that Paul's prophecy is going to come true. So he says that little detail. Then in verse 12, he says, we put in at Syracuse and stayed there 3 days. So going back to our map here, not that map. I've already showed you that. Where is it? There you are. So on this one, they put in at Syracuse, so they make it to Sicilia here. And then after that, they stayed there 3 days. From there, we set sail and arrived at Rhegium, which is here. So 3 days here, moved up to Rhegium. So they're making their way to Italy. And then from there, the next day, the south wind came up. And on the following, by the way, south wind is not the wind going south. It's a wind literally coming from the south. That was a little confusing for me at first. But yeah, it's a wind coming from the south. Came up, and on the following day, we reached Puteoli. I think that's how you say that. If I butcher Greek names, I'm sorry. It's just... yeah. Well, it was Greek at that point. But... they because of this wind, I will give you kind of an interesting thing here, just geography wise. It takes them like basically 3 days. Where is it? Yeah, the next day the south wind came up, and on the following day we reached Puteoli. So like the south wind came up from Rhegium, and it only took a day for them to get all the way up here, which is pretty crazy. So they were definitely getting speeded on their way with that south wind, which I just thought was an interesting point that he made. There we found some brothers and sisters who invited us to spend a week with them. And so we came to Rome. The brothers and sisters there had heard that we were coming, and they traveled as far as the Forum of Appius and the 3 taverns to meet us. At the sight of these people, Paul thanked God and was encouraged. When we got to Rome, Paul was allowed to live by himself with a soldier to guard him. So this is kind of cool. Rome's up here. The 3 taverns and the Appia Forum are down here. So there are some Christians that loved Paul so much, even though Paul had never met him, to basically make a trip on foot all the way down to here, where the ship ends up, basically. And this is why Paul was so encouraged. Like, he's never met these Christians before. He's never... really interacted with them. He didn't found the church there, and yet there were people that were willing to go down and visit him. This is going to be a setup because obviously they had heard of Paul, otherwise they wouldn't have made that journey. And we're going to see that another group of people had not really heard of things going on in the other parts of the world. And we're going to see kind of a contrast between this response that people have to Paul and then a later response that people have to Paul. And we'll see how Luke plays that out later on. But it's just really important to kind of focus on the moment that, like, as Christians, one of the best things we should be known for is our love. And these Christians were encouraging to Paul because they went above and beyond in the love of Paul by making this journey all the way down here. And I just find that really meaningful. Not saying that every Christian needs to make a journey on foot for every missionary that comes around. But I do think that Luke is particularly highlighting that event as very meaningful both to Paul and to how willing these Christians were to show their love for him. So very dear, very meaningful. That song was actually going through my head too. Yeah, it's an oldie. So he gets to Rome, and he's allowed to live by himself. So he's basically put under house arrest with a soldier there to guard him. Okay, so set up. Right now, this is the main story we're going to focus on, and it's not a lot of verses, but it's still a lot of cool meat in here. 3 days later, what? Cool meat. Yeah, right. That's funny. Oh, man. So 3 days later, he called together the local Jewish leaders. All right, so notice here, this is specifically the Jewish leaders in Rome. This isn't the church there at Rome. This is the Jewish leaders, people that would have had synagogues in Rome, basically anyone that's Jewish. And remember, I don't know if I've talked about this, but this is Paul's missionary strategy. He always preaches to the Jews first. If he can't find a synagogue there, he will literally go and find Jewish people to talk to. He is always focused on the Jews first. Once he finishes talking to the Jews and gets a response from them, then he turns to the Gentiles. That has always been his missionary strategy. And generally, this is when he usually is forced to have adversity and have people not be okay with his teachings. But he still, regardless of that, still always goes to the Jews first. That's just part of his missionary strategy. So he gathers together all the local Jewish leaders. When they had assembled, Paul said to them, "My brothers, although I have done nothing against our people or against the customs of our ancestors, I was arrested in Jerusalem and handed over to the Romans. They examined me and wanted to release me because I was not guilty of any crime deserving death. The Jews objected, so I was compelled to make an appeal to Caesar. I certainly did not intend to bring any charge against my own people. For this reason, I have asked to see you and talk with you. It is because of the hope of Israel that I am bound with this chain." All right, so there's a lot here. He's basically explaining himself to his Jewish brethren. And in this, he's explaining that he hasn't broken Torah. Like, that's what he says, against the customs of our ancestors. I haven't broken Torah. And I was arrested completely wrongly. Like, I've done nothing wrong, and they have been really just wanting me dead for illogical reasons, basically, is what he's arguing here. He said they examined him and wanted to release him, that being the Romans, and he's kind of pitting how, like, the Romans were actually more fair to him than the Jews in Jerusalem. And yeah, they wanted to release him, but because I was not guilty of any crime deserving death. Makes sense. If you're not guilty, you shouldn't be killed. The Jews, however, objected, so I was compelled to make an appeal to Caesar. I certainly did not intend to bring any charge against my own people. So here's a little window into Paul's logic for why he handled the Jerusalem situation the way he did. For those of you that haven't been reading along in the book of Acts, when he is put on trial in Jerusalem, he appeals to Caesar, so they literally have to ship him to Rome. That's the only thing that happens when you appeal to Caesar. Caesar has to hear your case, basically. It's like appealing after you get a judgment at a judge court. You appeal to the next level of the judge. You have to go there and you have to present your case to the next highest judge. That's basically what's happening here. Is he appealed to Caesar, the highest ruler in the land, to hear out his case. The reason he does that, though, is not just to get out of the situation in Jerusalem where the Jews were trying to kill him. The main reason he does that, and he says so here in the verse, is I did not intend to bring any charge against my own people. So even in the middle of his own people trying to kill him, he's still not trying to indict them in any shape or form. Like, he still has a belief in his people and a hope in his people. And so, put against a rock and a hard place, he wasn't willing to charge his own people. And I honestly think that the Romans would have listened to him if he had charged his own people with a crime. I don't know exactly what crime he's imagining he could bring against his own people, but it's obvious he had an argument that he could have brought to them that maybe because he's a Roman citizen, the Romans would have listened to. So he definitely had that in mind. Sorry. Ooh. He definitely had that in mind when he was in that whole situation, and he decided not to bring a charge against his own people. For this reason, I have asked to see you and talk with you. So it's his motivation behind that was his love for the Jewish people. And he's saying, for that, because I love the Jewish people and have never wanted to bring a charge against them, I've asked to see and talk with you first. Again, this is his main reason for why he always goes to Jews first. They're his own people. He wants to communicate with them first, and he wants to see how they feel about Jesus and the fact that Jesus claimed to be the Messiah, the one they've been awaiting for all of their history. And this very last line is the most telling of all of that. It is because of the hope of Israel that I am bound with this chain. So he's saying, look, it's because I was hoping that Israel would come around. It's because I was hoping in Israel first, always making sure that I never charge them with anything, always keeping them free from the Roman authority, basically, and Roman indictments, that I am in chains right now. I could have gotten out of chains if I really wanted to, but because I really hope in the Jews, because I hope in them, I'm stuck here, and this is where we've ended up. So this is just kind of a window into Paul's not. I think a lot of people think that Paul is pro-Gentile, anti-Jewish. And this is very much not the case. He is very pro-Jewish. And this is some of the verses you can use if you ever meet someone that really thinks that Paul is anti-Jewish, to kind of combat that. So keep that in mind. Yeah. Well, and it definitely can. Paul's loves double meanings like that. Yeah. Yeah. And so, no, that's a good point to reference as well, is that because of the hope of Jesus, because even in the Old Testament, Israel and Jesus go interchangeable. There are verses in Hebrews, I believe, that talk about Jesus being the true Israel, essentially. And so, yes, you can take it in that way. But I do think that there is a hope in his people as well, especially given the context where it's a charge against my own people. Every other instance of Israel is always being used in the context of the Jewish people more so than Jesus. Oh, yeah, that too. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a good point to bring out. And I do think you're right on that Jesus is the hope of Israel in a sense. And yes, he definitely could be saying that, it's also because of the fact that I've been upholding the gospel that I'm bound in chains. That's definitely a way you could read this. But I also think there is this nuance to it of him not wanting to bring a charge against his own people, at least, that seems to implicate that he's got a double meaning going on there. But yeah, that's good to point out. Also, the gospel causes us to be bound with chains. And he mentions that in Ephesians or Philippians. One of those, he says that it's because of the gospel that he's bound in chains. So yeah, you're not wrong on that. In verse 21, they replied, "We have not received any letters from Judea concerning you." So this is the Jews replying. "They have not received any letters, and none of our people who have come from there has reported or said anything bad about you. But we want to hear what your views are, for we know that people everywhere are talking against this sect." So they're kind of neutral. Obviously, they haven't heard anything bad. So all of the antagonism that the Jews have given Paul in Jerusalem hasn't made its way to Rome. It's primarily all been situated in Jerusalem. Also, all the negative things that have been happening in all of the areas where Thessalonica and Philippi and Macedonia, all of that hasn't reached them. So Luke is basically situating them here by giving us this little detail of what they said as these are a neutral case study, basically. Like, this is a case study of no influence from any of the other negative Jewish voices. This is completely new. These people have the best shot, basically, at receiving Paul's message because they haven't heard any negative things from any of the other towns. If you look at a lot of the different stories up to this point in the book of Acts, a lot of the reason that especially in Ephesus. Ephesus is the most funny because in Ephesus, the crowd literally gets stirred up for no reason at all. And they like talk about that a bit of how like, why are we all like rioting and stuff like that? I don't know. But yeah, so they have none of that influence. There's none of this like rioting or any type of influence like this. This is a really fair chance that Paul gets with this particular Jewish audience to deliver his message. Okay. And they're open to hearing his views. Like in verse 22, it's like, we want to hear your views, for we know that people everywhere are talking about against the sect. So they have heard at least that Christianity as a sect is not very popular, that it's pretty negative. But kudos to them, at least, for not just listening to the hearsay of the negativity of it and actually wanting to hear what he has to say. Okay, so that's the setup.